Hi, Dr. Carter. Welcome here.
Hi, Dr. Rajai. How
How are
are
you
you
doing today?
today? Well, today's a little bit cool, isn't it? We both have long sleeve shirts.
I know, I know. It's funny because sometimes when I have meetings with people who are like in the East Coast or Canada, they cannot believe that I'm living in San Diego because of what I
It's a little bit chilly, but
wear.
it's okay. We can live through it.
Yeah, the fun thing is like inside apartments or houses, it's like colder than outside sometimes. So I don't know how that works, but
It does work. It does
I
work.
know. So thank you so much for being here. I know that me and you, we have a lot in common, but one of the things that we have in common is we both, at some, point, we were international students here. So I was wondering if we can talk about that more. But before we start, could you please tell us more about yourself and your
Oh,
professional background?
yes, can I do that? Sometimes when people ask me that question, I say, how much do I divulge?
I know.
So, it's so interesting. Can we get the doctor out of the way?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Perfect.
I have it on my name there, but yeah.
Yeah, so
Sorry
it's
about that.
don't apologize. We women apologize so much. Don't apologize for nothing. So it's so interesting, Afrin. I'm talking to you as a colleague, right? And as a
Hmm.
professional, and we both had this background. But yesterday I was looking for some documents, right?
Hmm.
And I looked at them because I'm about to make a move. It's how much do you keep from your history and how much do you let it go, right?
Hmm.
And yesterday I was having this conversation and I saw all my certificates that I had accomplished in Brazil. So originally from Brazil, I looked at my CV and also my curriculum that allowed me to graduate with a degree in psychology. And you wouldn't imagine how much I studied. My program was 6 years, and I did 2 years of internship in several settings. So I did internships in hospitals, internships in organizations, and clinical setting. And once you graduate in Brazil from a BA in psychology, you can be a clinician,
Oh,
right?
okay. Interesting.
So it's so different. And I was looking at my curriculum. I said, I don't believe I study all of this. So there was neuroanatomy, anatomy 101 and 102, which I did with real cadavers.
Wow.
And what else? All the psychoanalysis that you can imagine. So there was a lot of psychology already in my background. Um, Came here to America, so we have these in common, right?
Hmm.
And had to start from zero because somehow what I've done in Brazil doesn't translate here. And if
Hmm.
it were to translate, I would have to put a lot of effort into it. So that's a little bit about my background in the past, but right now, what do I do?
Hmm.
I work at Alliant as a professor and the beginning of my career. So I've been teaching for a little bit because I've loved teaching. So since my master's degree, I've been teaching. I've worked in hospital setting here in
Hmm.
San Diego, and I worked with adolescents and communities, especially with people who spoke Spanish as their primary language. What else? Supervision is one of my passions. Love supervision. That's one of the things that I
Hmm.
love to do.
Oh, that.
And yeah, so then right now is a professor type of job that I have.
Mhm. So you wear different hats, like clinical setting, teaching, research, all these different things.
Yes, you wouldn't believe. So I'm still establishing again. I feel like I'm in this motion of finding what is important for me right now after graduation and doing so much research. I'm trying to go back towards my heart and see what I find more important. So a lot of writing about supervision and pedagogy
Hmm.
of teaching. Possible
Amazing.
research area, huh?
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. So could you please tell us more about your journey as an international student? I know that you talked about it, for a little bit, but like, could you tell us more about that?
Oh, should I? Should I? Should I? It started when? So I think when you ask me this question, I always go back to my clinical work in Brazil when I was noticing some things about how I was helping people. And it became an important point because I think sometimes if we pay enough attention to how we are experiencing ourselves when we're relating to people, we can
Mm,
find some information that can guide us to make some forward movement, right?
exactly.
So I was seeing people in communities, and in Brazil, we use a lot of psychology that has been given to us through our colonizers. So a lot of CBT, a lot of psychoanalysis. And I remember that I took one course in anthropology, and it was Foucault, of course.
Wow. Mhm.
So, how could I have been helping people from an individual lens? And I
Mhm.
think that was the turning point. And I said, I do not want to subscribe to this because I believe there's so much more to helping people than just looking at themselves from an individual approach. And I said, let me go out there and see what I find, right?
Mhm.
Like the question was, how can I use what I already know to kind of expand the ideas that I want to learn?
Yeah.
And that's how I came to America. I first went traveling around, so you don't want to know that piece of my life because it didn't work. I traveled Europe and I tried to find a place, a home of understanding, didn't work. When I came to America, it was amazing. So I said, okay, I'm here. I don't speak English. That was just the detail.
Mhm.
2008, it's okay, I can learn. But then I wanted to apply for a graduate program, and that then I became the process.
That is so, like, I can listen to you, all day because that is just so interesting and impressive and inspiring from my perspective. I know that, so I took English courses since I was 9 years old back in Iran. So when I wanted to come to the US, I was fluent in English. And then yet, I came to the US and there are all these different challenges. And then when I think about like stories like yours, I'm thinking like, oh my God, that must be really, really challenging. And you are so, so inspiring, right? Because not only you learn English, but you got your PhD, you became a professor, like inspiring professor, like all those different stories. Just I have a question because I just want to see compare Iran and Brazil. So do you have marriage and family therapy back home? No.
Now we perhaps are starting to have some schools
Okay.
that are reaching out to us, right?
Yes. Hmm.
So, but no, we basically learn westernized psychology. So what
Exactly. Hmm.
behaviorism, what else?
Hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. It was the same thing for me because I wanted to apply for a PhD in clinical psychology in the US, and I didn't know there's such a thing like marriage and family therapy exists, right? Because we have psychology and counseling in Iran. But then when I was looking for programs, I found marriage and I was like, oh my God, where were you? I love you. So, and then I applied for
I don't love
MFT.
the title as much, Efren, because I don't know if how much of marriage we deal with. We
Yeah.
deal with relationships, right?
Yeah, couples therapy, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Then I did think the same thing. I didn't know what MFT was. So I think it was through a professor of mine because I was taking, I'll tell you a fun fact and a
Mhm.
fun fact because I was driving today. The education in Brazil is much different than here, right?
Mhm.
We have to take so many tests. And do you remember those papers that have the little bubble?
Yeah. Yeah, we had them. Yeah.
So that's what you have to do to go anywhere. So if you want to apply for medical school, you have to do a whole test. It's 4 days.
Yes.
If you
Hmm.
have psychology, it's the same thing in Iran.
Yes. Hmm. Yes.
So I'm looking at that and I say, oh no, that's not for me. It's just like too much pressure. So what I did even here in America to learn English, I knew I could speak. I knew I could learn, but the test taking was so frightening
Hmm.
for. So what I did was I went to San Diego State University English School, and what they did was if you take undergraduate courses, even though I already have undergraduate degree,
Hmm.
then if you pass them, we'll give you a certificate saying that you do speak English. So it was there that I met one of my professors that I said, how can I do a graduate program? Like, how can I apply? And he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a clinician. At that point, I didn't know. He says, well, go to the MFT department and talk to them. And so I didn't know the difference between psychology counseling or MFT, but then it just happened that I applied for the program, I got accepted, and very debatable in English for my two first years. Don't remember much, but did.
Oh, just talking about these things because I remember the first time that I was in the US, I'm looking at the syllabus for a course and I'm literally crying, right? Because as you mentioned, like back in Iran, when you go to school, you only have like one or two exams during the whole semester for each course, right? And here like you have all these different assignments and a lot of them they're like writings in English as your second language. So I'm looking at all of these different things and I'm just crying and I'm like, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. So and
What?
like, sorry, go ahead.
Did you cry a lot?
I cried. One of my class, I always tell my students this story that one of my classmates, he was American, and one day he came to me and he was like, I have such a difficult time studying because we have so much readings and assignments. Like, what do you do? Because English is your second language. What do you do? And I told him, I just sit down, cry, and study and write papers. That's all I know, like all of them together. And while we are having this conversation, Donna, I wish like there was more conversations or people talking about these things at our time because I really struggle to find representative, right? In our field at my time, like mentors, professors who spoke English as a second language, who had international backgrounds. Again, like my experience, it was really difficult for me to find them. And I'm thinking like if there are some international students or people who want to apply to our programs in the US or in other countries, if they watch this video, I hope that this can be helpful for them in terms of maybe even like some perspective, some normalizing, all these different things.
All right. It actually, Efren, it got me thinking about how systems of power are in place, right?
Hmm.
Going back to me searching for documents yesterday, I found this essay that I had to write for my immigration interview. And it was an essay that immigration was asking to kind of know about my life and what I was hoping to do.
Hmm.
And I've read it. And if you read the essay, so today I write much different, right? But it was so wholesome. Like it felt to me like, although it wasn't academic writing, I wasn't at
Hmm.
the level of writing that I am right now through practice, right? But it was wholesome, and I could have been judged based on my writing
Hmm.
ability, right? And I was because I applied to programs that did not accept me.
Hmm.
I was also thinking about my experience when I was looking for an internship, and there is actually a story that stayed with me, and then it took me a while for me to understand that piece of data and how I wanted to move along with my life. And just like I've mentioned in the beginning, like some moments that we have in life,
Hmm.
they give us like that turning point event and say, that's it makes us question, okay, how do I move forward, right? So I went to this interview, Afrin, and it was for an internship in MFT, right?
Hmm.
I had been in America for 2 years. Imagine how I was speaking. Can you have any guesses? Very heavy with my accent,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I just landed.
Hmm.
But somewhat, as I came here with like this hope, and I already had so much background in psychology and seeing clients,
Hmm.
it wasn't the same experience for my colleagues, right? A lot of them, they came from different backgrounds. Some people came from a BA in dance, different things. They haven't touched psychology in any way, but I was so confident, and I said, I'm just gonna apply for one internship because I'm gonna get in. Look at my CV. There was
Hmm.
no way I wasn't gonna get in. I went in armed with confidence, talked to the people who were interviewing me. I've noticed that they were looking at me with particular eye. I
Hmm.
couldn't guess, but I guess I was too in my confidence, right?
Hmm.
And so towards the end of the interview, they asked, do you have any questions? And I said, no, no, I don't have any questions. And then one of the interviewees, a man, he said, yes, I do have a question for you. And I said, go ahead. And he said, your accent, it's very heavy. Do
Wow.
you believe that clients will be able to understand you when you speak? And I was taken back because although I had a bunch of experience,
Hmm.
right? What he noticed was the way that I was speaking. And I said, I haven't had a problem. And I'm hoping if that becomes a problem, I can navigate with people, right? So what happened was I did not get the internship.
Hmm.
And at that point, that became these thing that was pressuring me. Said, what do I do about it? What do I do about it? Because I've noticed that sometimes here it's hard for international students to kind of find their place of
Hmm.
being, right. We
Yeah,
talk a lot about cultural diversity, but are we embodying it
exactly. Like in action.
in
And is
action?
it deep work or is it just performative, right?
Right. So to go back to your question, and sometimes I get out of my trail of thinking, but to go back to your
That's
question, is when we ask people to look for things that can help them to be in a system that is unfair or unjust,
hmm.
we're asking them to navigate this whole uh, unequal, uneven
Yeah.
environment, right?
Hmm.
So the idea is to have people like you, like me, or other people that really understand the constraints that are in place for people to explore education in a different environment, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So many pressures, like the trained mind. Give me some APA style writing. Have me write a journal that will be submitted and will be picked apart from
Hmm.
people that have so much say in our environment, right? But
Hmm.
how are we helping students to understand that, okay, this is a process, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes things will happen and sometimes they don't, but
Yeah.
doesn't take away our worth, right?
Exactly. It's so beautiful and powerful what you're talking about, Donna. Me and my colleagues, we wrote this article for FTM, Family Therapy magazine, I don't know, 2 years ago or so, about academic writing, and that was based on my own experience and the experience of students and colleagues that I work with over the time. And in that article, I was talking about the same thing that you're talking about, that a lot of times we talked about, especially like in our field, because a lot of times it's all about the systemic perspective, diverse perspective, right? So we talk about it, but then the question is the deep work, inclusion work, is it there or not, right? And in terms of writing is just one of those things, but in terms of the work that we do, my question is this: do we enhance possibilities? Do we help students to enhance possibilities for them? Or do we just crush souls and spirits about all these different things? And we wrap it up beautifully, right? Because we as mentors, we can say, you didn't do something right, and I just wanted, you need this feedback, or whatever, right? So I'm trying to be helpful, but at the same time, I feel like the insight and the awareness is not there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I think it takes one to see one, right?
Mm,
Um, it takes a person who has been through some of these experiences to see what's happening through different lens.
yeah.
Um, if you were to look at the essay I wrote in 2008 from an immigration assignment, that
Hmm.
would be classified as good writing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I had what it took to be here. It took me a while. It took me 10 years to
Yeah.
become a professor, right?
Hmm.
But there were all these systems in place making judgments and
Exactly.
trying to make distinctions about my um, really my passion to
Yeah.
become who I wanted to be.
Exactly.
So
Right.
then it takes one to see one, right?
Hmm.
Then
Yeah.
when we are in the field now and someone comes and presents this idea
Mm.
about academic writing, so can we as new professors, like this new force, come in and say, well, tell me what classifies, or can you describe what it is?
Hmm.
Can we find a common ground or even a different way of seeing what is it that's needed for someone to come into this program?
Hmm.
And is there mentorship that will
Yeah.
be helpful in finding students that can develop into that professional
Yeah.
identity, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think it's sometimes funny because we talk about biases all the time in our classes as mentors, right? And then at the same time, we have this thick kind of like filter in front of us, and we see everything like through this filter. And as soon as we see someone who has accent, or English is their second language, we have all these assumptions. So I remember like that one of my mentors, he laughed at me when I told him that I want to be a faculty member, back at a time, and I want to publish. Kind of like he laughed at me that like this is a joke, like you cannot obviously do that. And at the same time, like I graduated from my PhD program with 7 publications, right? But I still no, I still remember that moment that he laughed at me, right? So again, like I hope that maybe, as you mentioned, like new generations or faculty members or mentors, or all of us, we can think and rethink all these different things. So I know that we talked about some of your experiences, but what do you think about your multicultural background? How does it help you in our field?
Or maybe it doesn't, right? Who knows? Who
Who
knows
knows,
what
right?
will help me? Um, um, that's a good question, and it makes me stop thinking because it makes me evaluate like this experience that I had that really chipped a little bit of my intentions away.
Mm-hmm.
Like those that make your soul hurt so, so bad when people are not really able to see the totality that you bring to the table, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, not everybody knew that I was here by myself, that I came here with no family,
Mm-hmm.
and that studying was really, really something that took effort,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, as someone who was trying to accomplish something, it's often that we can discount what happens in the background, backstage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do pay attention to these things, I think more than usual, because I think that when we talk about including people, then sometimes we exclude their lived experience. And so just thinking of my history, like my personal background history, and just seeing how many times I showed up to a meeting and would come back home and not really be able to speak for a day or so.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you were there,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's hard to find a community that really pays attention to what
Mm-hmm.
it takes to become who you want to be, but like in ongoing development, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
feel like so much like an art form. You're making art with your own abilities or your own self, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea here is, how do I use what I know to guide how I want to be with other people? And I think that comes through in many ways. Like it comes through my pedagogy of teaching. I
Mm-hmm.
hope it does. It comes through when I supervise students. It comes through what we choose to speak about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you one of the most beautiful classes I've ever had was when I was teaching right in the beginning of the pandemic, and we were the last day of class, and it was the most important class to give. And then George Floyd was murdered.
Oh.
So
Mm-hmm.
then I had these moment, and I said, well, I can go about business,
Mm-hmm.
or I can give people space to talk about what matters.
Yeah.
And so you as a professor with the understanding that it doesn't matter how much you want to be pressed to do what universities or academia presses
Mm-hmm.
you to do, right? Like you have a say. So just
Mm-hmm.
knowing that is important. And I
Yeah.
don't know if I answer your question because there's
Yeah.
so much to it.
I know we can talk about it for hours. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it makes sense what you mentioned, kind of like bringing up all these different conversations, um, even like to start like a discourse on some of these things, right? When we are talking about culture, diversity, inclusion, right? Because if we don't talk about them, if we don't have conversations about them, how can we act about them, right? And then there are always some people who feel like they're not heard, they're not understood, right? So we need to have some space for that. And I think that, as you mentioned, as mentors, especially like in our fields. That's
Yeah.
on us sometimes to bring up these conversations.
But can we actually? So then it takes, I was reading yesterday, so there was a saying, join resistance.
Mm,
Like, are we joining resistance when we're going against the grain? Like, are we
mm,
joining resistance? How much of a say do we have as such a young faculty, right?
mm,
How
hmm.
much do we stray from the traditional models? That's a question. And are you willing to bear the consequences of it?
Exactly. Yeah. That whole system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so
Are
interesting.
you? Let me ask you, are you? Tell me.
I
Are
know
we?
that I feel like I'm always ready to fight the system, but at the same time, I know that in reality, a lot of times, you see all these different barriers and um, consequences. So,
I know. And I was watching a movie, my favorite movie, friend, that I've watched when times were hard. It was just like that soup for the soul. It
hmm
was Dr. Seuss and the Lorax.
hmm
And there was a saying that unless someone cares a whole lot, then things will be the same, right? And
hmm
then there's this saying that it is what it is, right?
yeah,
So you remember we've talked about
hmm
it.
hmm
And in the movie, it says it's not about what it is, it's about what can become, right?
that's beautiful.
And we
Yeah.
know the state of what it is, right?
hmm hmm
But yet we're choosing to kind of make a different movement to see
Yeah.
what can become.
Yeah. That is so beautiful. I just want to pause and think about that for 5 minutes, but I know that we have
Yeah.
limited time. But it's really interesting because again, it goes back to whole system concept and also consequences and privileges that you have, right? So with every fight that you go through, there is risk and all these privileges that you're going to you may lose. And the question is, are you willing to do that or not, right? So I always tell my students, speak the truth. That's saying speak the truth even if your voice shakes. And I try to practice that. And there have been times that literally, like when I was talking, my voice was shaking, but I hope that I can still do that because, as you mentioned, if we don't do anything, like it would be the same. It is what it is, would be there all the time.
No, and I've seen you doing it, Afrin, and I've seen you speak, and you speak so beautifully when you bring up concerns and issues and really values that matter to you. And I can see that. So it is inspiring just to watch from behind the scenes to all these faculty meetings, right? So we know each other from how we're trying to approach this new career.
Yeah. In the
True.
culture of the whole academia, right? In the whole um across the nation.
It is true. It is true. So, what's going to take for us to morph into this new identity?
hmm
It's a question that I'm always asking myself.
hmm
How much do I bring of my own knowing, and how much do I share? And what is going to take me to a place where it will feel that I'm aligned with
hmm
my values, right?
hmm
All questions, they come up every single day that I wake up.
Yeah, yeah. I think those are important questions, right? And I love the process of thinking and rethinking. So there's always room for that. But I know that we talked about it, Donna, a little bit about that action part. But what do you see lacking in our field about culture, diversity, and inclusion? What do you wish for? The
We
list
have
is a, is a long
we
list.
have much time for this. What do I wish? Um, it's it touches a chord, right?
Mm,
What do I wish? Um, just thinking about what each of us bring to the table, right? And how we can highlight our knowledges. It's an important thing to think about. I'm writing, oh, not writing, reading this book, Efren, and I'll share a quote. Like
hmm
this, one of my favorite books lately, it's Anti-Fragile from Nassim Taleb.
hmm
And
I
it's,
really like Nassim Taleb. Hmm
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
you do, what do you like about him?
The book or just Nassim Taleb?
Yeah, the author.
I really like it. I actually follow like his Instagram page, and I'm always like looking forward to reading his quotes because I really like the some of the ways that he conceptualized all these different things systematically and about like economic. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me read you just I'm compelled to read what he says here. It's this idea of how to love the wind, right?
Mm,
When we look at limitations and deficits and lacking and things that are not
mm,
going well.
mm,
It says, he says, wind extinguishes candles and energizes fire, right?
mm,
So he says, you want to be the fire and wish for the wind. And so then when it comes to challenges, right?
mm,
How am I thinking about my own positioning when I see and I'm going up against something that may not be helpful in my
mm,
career or even like the things that I see about the field? I think where we find resistance, there is release, right?
mm,
So just thinking about this concept, I don't know what I can wish, but what
mm,
I wish for myself is just like this constant thinking and rethinking that you are bringing it up
mm,
because it takes one to see one, right?
mm, mm,
So when some people don't have the privilege to stop and think about these processes,
mm,
I'm here all thinking, all in thinking
mm,
about them. In terms of cultural diversity in our field, um, my hope would be to include different voices and different ways of thinking and writing, right?
mm, mm,
And also to make a little bit of to help people engage in critical thinking. uh,
mm,
Sometimes those publications they can be taken to a level of this is the holy grail of what we need to know,
mm.
and we need to know that everything has a blind spot, right?
Yeah.
That you should not throw away, but there are blind spots. And
Mm,
so what do you hold on to and what you let go? It's a constant exercise of your own critical thinking.
yeah.
And I wish, so that's what I wish for. I wish that more people knew about this.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. And I feel like becoming a therapist is all about that critical thinking, right? Excuse me. And so here you are talking about all these different things, and I'm thinking about, okay, so when we are talking about these things, how can we actually help students to, enhance possibilities, right? And so you mentioned Nassim Taleb, and he has this quote. I don't remember the exact words, but the content is like, be very careful when you ask people, what would you do if you were like in my shoes? And when people they would tell you, if I were you, I would do XYZ. And be mindful because sometimes they benefit from what you gain, but if you lose something, if there is a harm, like nothing would happen to them. And I think about that a lot of times in terms of power and privilege, especially like in terms of mentors, supervisors, teachers, all these different things, because we go and we say all these different things to our students. And sometimes if they gain something, we also gain something, at least we feel like we are a helpful teacher or mentor or supervisor, whatever. But a lot of times when there is a harm, we may not be, affected by that harm. And that's about everybody, especially like international students or people with different cultural background. Because again, like I think we go there and we don't ask questions. We just go with our own assumptions or biases. And that could be as simple as you are here, you are a, I don't know, master's PhD student. You should have known XYZ, right? And no one asks, do you know XYZ, right?
Right?
And then so all these different things that, as you mentioned, it comes from experience, like our personal experience and also, professional experience. But what do you think about that question? How can international students, how can they enhance the possibilities, and how can we help them with
Yeah.
that, with those options?
Oh, that's a tricky question, Efren, because as you just explained beautifully, it takes so much, it's so complex to
Mm-hmm.
really understand how we can position ourselves in a way that we're paying attention to what matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about expanding possibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And looking at the context of an international student, Pay attention. I think that it is important for us to really pay attention to what is it that the person is coming up with, how they're speaking about their experience. Do we know what it is that they're mentioning? There is also just knowing for a fact that because we are in this position of mentor,
Mm-hmm.
professor, there is already taken for granted power differential.
Mm-hmm.
Think that's the whole thing about like who do I call doctor and who I don't. I had
Yeah.
horrible experiences when I was a student with professors that only wanted to be named or called like doctors, right? So then there was this distinction: you are there and I'm here, and I know more than you, so please.
Mm-hmm. The
So
power
then,
dynamic. Mm-hmm.
yeah, right. So then, how can I take that away, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe like acknowledge that that's in place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then say, I know that this is the complexity that brings us together. So how
Mm-hmm.
can I be accountable? So I believe that for professors, there is something that we need to pay attention to is the accountability. Like
Mm-hmm.
what you see, but what you fail to see.
Yeah.
And when it comes to relationships and really relating to people, I think what would open possibilities, Efren, it's this idea of not letting conversations die the
Mm-hmm.
moment that they end, right?
Yeah, I
So
love
then
it.
keep conversations living.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens to me like most of the times when I found out that I could do this, and I'm like, oh, that's just a game changer, right? So then if I try to talk about something that I don't think it kind of, or I ask my students didn't fit well, so then
Mm-hmm.
people have permission, it's their opportunity to revisit. They
Yeah.
don't need to die,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly.
And
That's
keep
exactly the
moving.
same. Yeah. And sometimes they're uncomfortable, right? And that is okay. Like I believe that that deep inclusion work, it has to be uncomfortable. If it's not uncomfortable, you're just doing it as a performance.
Yeah. And
Because
we can,
it's
we can
easy.
perform, right?
Because I think it's easy to ask people, what are your pronouns? Like, and that's a good question, but that's easy, right? That's the bare minimum. Like
Yeah.
deep conclusion, sorry, not conclusion,
Yeah.
inclusion work. Deep inclusion work is like includes all these different conversations that are uncomfortable. Either it's with your clients, with your students, with your colleagues, whoever the audience is, right? So you need to get uncomfortable if you want to be, I think, genuine on that journey.
And it takes some distinctions to make, right?
Yeah.
Um, are we paying attention to what is it, to what matters? And that's the central question every day in the conversation. There's this quote, not a quote, but I've learned to approach relationships going at the heart of the heart, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as if I'm teaching something and I see unfairness, how do I strike at the heart of the hurt?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, offering, and that came wide. And I'm writing about this actually. So I'll go back to my experience as an international student, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I was in my master's program, we had this thing that was called unstructured group.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was for students to speak about content and their experience. And because we had a cohort that was so diverse, right? We had like 5 international students, people that have lived in America for a long time. So you can imagine the
Yeah.
outcome of those conversations, right? You
Mm-hmm.
had people like me who had just arrived in the
Mm-hmm.
US, and you had people who had some very good knowledge of English. So Vivian Burr and Foucault, they proposed that language is power to define others, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being in conversations where I lacked language.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember conflict arising from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I really vividly remember that my professors didn't approach what was happening, um, looking at the lens of, okay, there is some unequal power dynamics here. Clearly, there's
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't express everything in a way that everybody else does. So, of
Mm-hmm.
course, but they chose not to intervene. And that moment stayed with me forever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it made me question, okay, I do have some knowledge about what I see. How do I become accountable for the things that are happening in front of me, but the things that are invisible too? And
Mm-hmm.
I think like that moment was a moment that people could have, like some people who knew something could have pointed out
Mm-hmm.
the direction or tried to facilitate a space.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is also value in going through hardships, just like Taleb was saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is also value. So because of that experience, then I became much more invested in paying attention to
Yeah.
those moments, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you share that because I had a similar experience. The story was very different, but like the whole concept. And in my story, like people who were like in higher position, they ask me, myself, to go and do something. Versus like sometimes when you have less power, you need people who have more power to share their power with you, right? Not just tell you to, hey, go and do this. And that was, as you mentioned, it is still like that moment, that situation is still stays with me and I think about it. So I know that we have like a short time, and I just wanted to add one more thing about when we are talking about all these different possibilities for students is beyond, everything that we mentioned, I think one more thing that can be helpful is we as professors, mentors, supervisors, all these different roles, if we just keep thinking and rethinking all the different things that we do, because and it's for all of us. Sometimes we are so used to one style or one behavior or one type of thing that we do it for, I don't know, 10 years. And then if someone asks us, why do you do that? Then you're like, I don't know, because my professors did that, right? So kind of like just continuing what, and we don't know if it works, if it doesn't work. And one example of that could be style, the feedback style that we have, right? I remember exactly that one time, one of my mentors, like on my paper, there was this feedback which said, very, very, very horrible, right? So,
So
and
very, very horrible.
and I remember that because when I opened the document and I saw that, I was like, this must be a mistake. I closed and I reopened like 10 times to make sure that it's there. And it was there. So, and then again, like that's an exaggerated example, but like when we give feedback, like what is the function of that? Is it helpful? Is it just for our own ego that we see something and we say, hey, I understand this, you don't understand this, or, whatever, just challenge those things in ourselves because I think that that can be helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so as our last question, I asked this question from all of our guests. What is one thing that you would tell the younger version of yourself, maybe when you were an MFT student, about becoming a therapist or a mentor?
Yeah. Well, exactly what Taleb was mentioning, Afrin, like how to love the wind.
Mm,
If I were to look back in my experience and just look at that young person that wrote the essay for immigration and just the wholesome moments where I was trying to share my hopes to become a therapist, and he had there that I wanted to become a professor like
mm,
10, 15 years ago. That was the end of my essay. Learn how to love the wind and look at it as a helpful value. A lot of people they shy away from discomfort, right? And
mm-hmm,
with all the therapies that we learn and behaviorism at its best, helping us to think that we have to learn how to cope with
mm-hmm,
moments, right? Is understanding that we are here in this world as human beings, right?
mm-hmm,
So be aggressively and empowered as a human. So part of the human experience is to love and to suffer and to have joy and to have many, many moments of being just people. So
mm,
challenges are part of what it takes for us to become who we want to be and who we always evolve. So if I were to look at myself, I would just say, little Donna, um, in the future, things will get bad, but they will all get better.
mm,
And they will keep fluctuating. So I know that it can be discouraging, and that person that told you that nobody would understand
Mm,
your English, and that other person that said your essay is very, very, very horrible. Um, Pay attention to those
mm.
moments and understand that can be they can be valuable lessons to help you kind of understand much more what your values are.
That was beautiful. Yeah. Places that you felt that pain deeply, and then you can care deeply about those things, and then you can have creating offering from my perspective. You can actually go and do something about those things. And I think that is powerful.
Yeah, so I wouldn't wish any other way. And now, as my older self, I've learned, I believe, and I'm not trying to sound like Juliana. Is that how I said Pollyanna? Juliana, whoever Anna is, but it's learning how to love those moments, right? Because they were in place and they taught me how to make much more distinctions about really how I want to be with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not that professor who's gonna write very, very, very horrible. And I I'm committed not to.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that. That is, that means a lot, I'm sure, for many people, and of course that all of us. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. This was a beautiful and, from my perspective, powerful conversation, and I hope that it can be helpful for many, domestic and international students both, because we are all human beings at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Efren.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.